Welcome back here on Live Now from Fox, 1231 on the East Coast and 931 on the West Coast. My name is Josh Breslow, and I'll be here with you for the next couple hours to bring you all of your top stories and live events from across the country and the world. Right now, we do continue to follow the latest on that fragile Gaza ceasefire as President Trump prepares to head to the region and address Israel's parliament, the Knesset, in the coming days. Now, right here is a live look over Tel Aviv and Israel, where you can see thousands upon thousands of people are gathered there, as they have been on Saturdays, really over the last couple years. And you can see just how many people are holding signs of those who are still held hostage. Now, the deadline approaching for all remaining hostages to be released as part of that U.S. brokered ceasefire deal. I do want to check in live. Jennifer Griffin at Fox News is joining us from over in Israel right now. Jennifer, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Josh.
And I did want to ask you essentially how that ceasefire is holding up as of right now. Again, it's been just over 24 hours.
Well, the ceasefire is holding up completely. We know because Steve Witkoff and the Admiral Brad Cooper, who heads U.S. Central Command, traveled down to Gaza earlier today, and they met with the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, who had pulled back to the agreed-upon line. That agreed-upon line still keeps the Israeli Defense Forces in about 53% of the Gaza Strip. But because the guns have now gone silent on both sides, about 500,000 Palestinians have returned to their homes, moving from the south in a constant stream of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who've been living in tents, returning to the northern part of Gaza. What they are finding is hard to describe as homes because most of it is rubble. 90% of the Gaza Strip has been destroyed in the last 2 years of fighting. What we are waiting for now, and you mentioned those thousands of Israelis who have streamed into Hostage Square here in Tel Aviv, which is where they've gathered every Saturday night for the last 2 years to press the government and Hamas to bring the hostages home. They now know that within the next 48 hours, those 20 living hostages and the 28 deceased hostages should be back in Israel. We're learning from Hamas that they cannot find some of the deceased hostages, so I think the Israeli government is preparing the public for the fact that some of those deceased hostages, it may take a little bit more time to find and to unearth in Gaza. But the 20 living hostages are expected to be out and brought back to Israel by 6 a.m. local time Monday morning. That's just ahead of President Trump coming here to Israel. He'll address the Knesset in Jerusalem. But emotions are very, very high here in Israel. There have been disappointment in the past, but most people that I speak to and all of the officials that I speak to on both sides believe that this hostage deal and ceasefire will hold in this first phase. The second phase is going to be a lot more complicated in terms of disarming Hamas, rebuilding Gaza, and eventually putting the Palestinians on some sort of path to statehood. That is all a lot more complicated than the release of the 2,000 Palestinian prisoners in exchange for the 20 living hostages. Josh.
And Jennifer, I did want to ask you about something you mentioned, because we've heard some fairly vague details from the Hamas terror group, and it's important to note that this is something that's been said a lot over the past 2 years or so, but the fact that they cannot find all of the bodies there of the hostages, that it sounds as though will not hinder the deal in any way. Is that correct?
Well, what we believe, Josh, is that there are certain annexes to this 20-point agreement that was signed off in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, on Wednesday. And those annexes, I believe, have some sort of understanding and agreements that while in this hostage release, there may be a few, up to 10 of the deceased hostages who have not been found yet. Remember, some of these hostages were farmed out to different factions of Hamas, to Islamic Jihad, to other Palestinian armed factions, and they may have lost track of some of the dead bodies. And so what the agreement, I believe, in the annex suggests is that there will be international security forces of some sort, including perhaps the Turks and the Egyptians, who will then go into Gaza and work alongside the Palestinians in finding those remaining deceased hostages. The U.S. military has sent 200 U.S. soldiers and members of U.S. Central Command here to Israel. They've been arriving over the past 24 hours. All of them should be here by tomorrow, and they are going to be setting up under the aegis of Admiral Brad Cooper, the CENTCOM commander, a base, if you will, just north of Gaza, near Ashdod in southern Israel, where they will be monitoring the ceasefire, humanitarian aid, security aid, and coordinating with Qatar, Egypt, UAE, Turkey, and others as they try to, after the hostage release occurs, to ensure that the ceasefire holds and that Hamas begins its disarmament, that the final deceased hostages, if they are not returned, are found. This is a very, very delicate period, but everybody is moving very swiftly, and there's a great deal of confidence that at least this first phase will take place, and those 20 Israeli living hostages will be home in Israel by Monday.
And I did want to ask you here before I let you go, do we have an idea of the timing there for President Trump's trip? Because we know it originally we'd heard Saturday, now we're hearing Sunday, possibly addressing the Knesset on Monday. What do we know so far about all of that as it does remain fluid?
Well, I think it's safe to assume that the president will fly overnight Sunday and arrive in Israel and be on the ground for a few hours. He will address the Knesset on Monday. He also may, in fact, meet with some of the families of the hostages. A lot of this planning is very fluid because of how quickly the agreement came together. We then understand that President Trump will fly to Egypt for a summit with other international players to thank the president of Egypt who helped oversee these talks in Sharm el-Sheikh that included these very crucial Qatari negotiators, the Turkish intelligence, among others. And so then what comes next in terms of the rest of the peace deal, the rebuilding of Gaza, who's going to be the security force in Gaza, how do you disarm Hamas and ensure that they are not in control of Gaza? All of that is going to take a massive Middle Eastern and international effort. We've heard talk of Tony Blair, the former British Prime Minister, serving as some sort of regent over Gaza, and President Trump himself being the head of what he calls a peace council there. But all of that has to be hammered out. The most important first phase is this exchange of 2,000 Palestinian prisoners, which will, for the Israelis, is a bitter pill because that includes 250 Palestinians who are serving life sentences for carrying out terror attacks or planning terror attacks here in Israel. Most of those, about 150 of them, will be deported overseas. Some of them will be sent to Gaza, and then of the 1,700 or so Palestinians who were detained after October 7th, none of those who are being released in that 1,700 participated in the October 7th attacks. That was a red line for Israel. But the 1,700 are Palestinians who were detained in the aftermath of that massacre 2 years ago, and they will be returning to Gaza or to the West Bank or wherever they had been detained from. So that will all be taking place. It's a great deal of synchronicity involved. There are 3 hospitals here in Tel Aviv, 5 in Israel that are preparing as we speak to receive the living Israeli hostages as well as the deceased, and they will care for those. Some of those hostages are in a state of severe malnourishment, trauma, as you can imagine. Many have been held underground in tunnels, may not have seen the light of day for much of the past 2 years. Josh.
Jennifer Griffin there with Fox News. Thank you so much for taking the time to keep us updated. I'm sure we'll check in with you again as we see everything develop here in the coming hours.
Thank you, Josh.
And I do want to take you out to this live look that we do have right here. This appears to be over in Hostage Square there in Tel Aviv. You can see a lot of folks are gathered and are essentially waiting at this point on the release of those hostages. As we mentioned, there is a deadline of Monday morning after the ceasefire went into effect on Friday morning. They were given, the Hamas terror group, 72 hours to release those hostages. And as Jennifer Griffin did just say, Hamas is claiming that at this point they may not know the location of up to 10 of those hostages. Right now, there are 48 that are believed to be either dead or alive. 20 of them believed to be alive. The rest, unfortunately, deceased, murdered on October 7th or dying while in captivity. Again, we are taking a live look here in Tel Aviv. We should be getting some comments at some point from Jared Kushner, as well as Steve Witkoff, who is the Middle East envoy. We'll bring those to you if we do get them here on Live Now from Fox.